chairman of the board,
or deputy chairman.
or deputy chairman, both signatures at, two
No,
signatures
right,
at a
it's
time?
the general manager and chairman or deputy chairman.
General manager and chairman or deputy chairman. But the checks require two signatures?
That's correct.
All right. Now, you said you documented your concern over the issuing of checks. That's one of the last things you said last time you were here. You documented your concerns which you had over the issuing of checks. You would want to elaborate on that?
This, I referred, Mr. Chair, to a particular instance where a request was made for a reimbursement of funds to the chairman, and that is what I was referring to, yes, and I wrote my concern about that.
What was your particular concern?
The appropriate documentation was not presented, so according to I wrote to the general manager a memo, sir, and I indicated that the documentation presented for this reimbursement to the chairman, invoices were not provided. So I said effective internal control procedures would require that I have invoices detailing the items bought to be attached for the reimbursement. So I'm requesting that the invoices be submitted for the purchases, and there were.
Can I ask you who made the claim for the reimbursement? Was it the chairman himself or herself?
When you say made the claim, the general manager wrote to me, so
The general manager made
wrote
the claim?
to me on behalf of the chairman. Yes,
The
the
chairman
memo
at the
said to
time
me.
was,
The chairman at the time was Mr. Anthony Wiltshire.
Anthony Wiltshire, and the claim was for reimbursement for what?
Personal funds used by the chairman for the purchase of various tools and equipment for the Quality Assurance Department.
Personal funds used by the chairman for the purchase of tools and various equipment for the Quality Assurance Department?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Is that usual?
No, it was not. This is why I wrote.
Do you know of any other instances where the chairman used personal funds to purchase tools and equipment for the Quality Assurance Department?
There were other instances. This is why I wrote.
There were other instances
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
that the chairman used his personal funds to acquire tools and equipment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I wrote.
And
I
proper
wrote
claims were made, in those instances, proper claims were made for a reimbursement?
From what I recalled, after I wrote.
After,
Yes, because as I said, I wrote requesting that the proper documentation be provided.
so in this particular instance, proper documentation was provided?
And subsequent from what I recall.
But what about the ones previous?
From what I recall,
In this particular instance, what was the amount we're talking about?
$14,819.45.
$14,819.45?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm seeing that kind of.
Yes, Chair. Right, so it was presented to me an invoice, a document which said invoice and requesting this reimbursement.
It's
So-
a document which says invoice?
Right, from Mr. Wiltshire. This was attached to the memo from the general manager.
So please explain to the committee. You say it's a document which says invoice? It is not a question of you having received invoices from suppliers of the equipment and the tools. It's not that?
It was not.
It is a document which says invoice
Right.
from
and
the chairman?
Yes, and it mentioned a particular supplier.
And what was the supplier mentioned there?
This one was Pierce Furniture.
Pierce Furniture.
Yes.
So it's furnishings that were bought for the Quality Assurance Department?
A workbench or something like that, because, I think it was a workbench, because it was subsequently provided.
$14,819.45, you said?
Yes, sir.
Do you have, beyond that, I'm coming to you, Senator Cummings, yes, I'm coming to you. Do you have beyond that any documents making reference to other amounts claimed by the chairman for purchases made from personal funds? You said that it happened subsequent to that on on multiple occasions.
No, Mr. Chair.
You did not say
Because it was
that?
corrected.
Sorry?
No, because I didn't bring any documents because the matter was corrected after I wrote. So once a claim was made, the correct documentation was provided.
So what constitutes the correct documentation?
The invoice from the supplier. So
From the
for example,
supplier.
So if you went, sir, and
So
bought-
what amounts are we talking about? That's what I'm asking, from those invoices.
I don't have that information.
Do you know if Pierce Furniture occurs again in those invoices?
I don't recall, but I don't think so, because I think it was just two benches that were bought.
Now, we can have access to this, we don't have that documentation, do we?
Yes, sir, you can.
We have that?
Yeah, yes, sir.
We have it?
No, you don't.
We can have that from you?
Yes, attorneys, yes, sir.
I'm coming to you now, Senator Cummings, just this matter of checks still. You last time expressed somewhat of a bit of suspicion around the issuing of checks by the Transport Board for payment on supplies or services not related to Transport Board operations.
No, they were all related to Transport Board.
My notes suggest that you said you had somewhat of a suspicion about checks which were issued for non-Transport Board related services, checks issued by the chairman of the board.
So
We can check the record, but that's my notes, but we can check the official recorded of your testimony last time.
That was my misunderstanding, sir, because everything were related to services for the Transport Board.
Okay, so no payment for non-Transport Board related services.
No payment, no, sir.
You also said that you were given directives on more than one occasion from persons above you in administration, also persons from in the political arena. Am I right or wrong in recording that as well? Question was, were you ever given directives from anybody higher than yourself in administration or anybody related to the political arena in Barbados? And I think your response was yes.
Again, sir, my response was yes, because I thought my understanding of the question that I was given instructions by persons on the board in relation to the policies and procedures of the board. And it was yes in relation to the fact that the general manager and myself would often discuss the policies and procedures of the board.
So you were not directed or instructed by anybody above yourself or anybody associated with the political administration in Barbados to take action contrary to the rules of the board, as far as this is what you're saying today?
That's correct. No,
It does not accord with what you said last time.
because I misunderstood that, sir, and I'm seeking
Okay.
to correct. No instructions were given to anything contrary. to the board's regulations.
Okay. Senator Cummins?
Thank you very much, Chair. I do have a few questions. I'm curious about your last testimony about the submission of invoices. Is there a procurement policy in place at the Barbados Transport Board? And if so, what is it?
There's a procurement policy. Let me see if I brought it along. Is right. Policies and procedures, PO1, PY01 speaks to all goods and services are ordered and contracted through the stores and purchasing section following due process and authorization.
Could you walk us through what the due process constitutes? Is there a tenders and procurements committee? Is it a review? Are there public tenders? Are there 3 quotes procured? Is there an assessment process? Are there submitted what you call for construction projects, bills of quantities? What is the process for that assessment?
The process, we follow generally the guidelines of the government service, the regulations in terms of contracts under $50,000, 3 quotations, between $50,000 and $200,000, 3 quotations, and then we go to public tender over $500,000. But the procurement process, to give you an example here, policies and procedures SPS 01. I have this one revised January 2013. All purchases must duly authorized and must be within the current year's budgeted expenditure. Where purchases are duly authorized by the department head, which has to be done, which not covered the current budget, approval must be obtained through the finance committee of the board. Where there is an awarded tender for the supply of goods and services, such must be obtained from that source when the tender remains. Where there is no contracts, 3 quotations must be obtained. So as I said, we follow the financial rules of the...
Okay, so I'm going with your last statement. You follow the financial rules of the government service. For the procurement of goods around $14,000, what is the procedure outlined in the government financial rules?
$14,000?
Yes.
Less than $50,000, you don't need to go to quotations.
So you get what?
We would just get, the best, a quotation or an invoice or request from the particular supplier.
So you have a single supplier, single sourced, sole source, or do you have selective sourcing? Do you have 3 at least? What is the practice?
There were selective sources because there were over 100 suppliers which the board have. So like, for example, for printing, you use more than one. So we looked for the best price. So this is just an example. So if you were going to buy furniture or buy a desk, we would call the stores department responsible for sourcing the best price.
Okay, so is there any evidence prior to the submission of an invoice? Because an invoice suggests that you have gone through the process of assessment prior. Was there any indication that there was an assessment process by the stores department that looked at the best price?
They should be, yes.
Should be. Have you seen that process?
I'm aware it's there. I will not seen it, but stores would normally, it's part of their responsibility when a requisition is made. So a requisition is made for a particular item, and stores department would document, yes, they would have checked the 3 suppliers or 3 sources and then make the recommendation.
What year was this, ma'am?
But for what year?
What year did this transaction take place where you received an invoice from the chairman for $14,000?
Oh, you're going back to that.
I'm very much there, ma'am.
The year was March 15, 2017 was when the memo was written to me.
March 15, 2017. Is there any instance that you are aware of before where a chairman, any chairman, would have undertaken expenditure associated with the operations of the Barbados Transport Board in the 15 years that you were there, for which they had to be reimbursed to purchase stores, goods?
Not that I'm aware that I can recall.
Is there any circumstance that you would be aware of that would necessitate a chairman incurring expenditure to procure goods or services on behalf of the Barbados Transport Board?
Not that I would have been aware, because as I said, we have a procurement process. No.
So in the absence of a procurement process, in the absence of a transparent assessment process, you have an invoice that was paid as a result of a submission from which department again? Did you say the Quality Assurance Department? Is this the same department around which so many concerns have been raised in the course of the Auditor General's report spanning 2015 through 2018?
No, you're misunderstanding. The invoice was not paid by the Quality Assurance Department. The process is that the documentation came to me with this invoice.
Documentation came to you from
the general manager. So it came to the finance department with her memo saying, financial controller, these attached receipts so and so, please review, check the receipts, and make this payment. So not the Quality Assurance Department. So it was I, as I said, as financial controller, wrote, then responding to the general manager saying, in order for, and you can, if you bought something on behalf of the transport board, produce the correct documentation, and yes, you will be refunded. And it was produced.
Okay. I have another question for you, Mr. Chairman. It is in connection with the documentation which you have shared with us. I've had the opportunity to briefly go through them, and so I am a little bit concerned. So if we go back to the earlier line of questioning around the double invoicing, you mentioned that for BM 506, it was a negligible amount and therefore it was not detected. In the case of the double invoicing, we're not talking about $300. In this instance, we're talking about a payment of over $257,000, over $250,000, and an overpayment of $128,000 odd. Is there any indication from your perspective as to why this not negligible amount was not detected by your system until it was reviewed by the Auditor General and then checked thereafter?
No indication, ma'am, but I would just want to reiterate that when it was drawn to my attention, I immediately called the person, the supplier to whom these monies were made in the presence of the Internal Auditor, and he did agree once the documentation was provided to repay.
Thank you. I have one final question, Chairman. I reviewed the documentation. Are there other memos that you have written, email correspondence, where you have raised any of the concerns about the operations of the Transport Board, whether it is Quality Assurance or any other department? Are these all of the memos that you have written, or just a summary?
Just some.
Okay. So I would like to be clear in my own mind as to the rationale behind this. When the chairman began, the chairman says you wrote for the purpose of clarity, seeking to adhere to the procedures, to cover yourself, and a range of reasons are all understandable. These memos that I have just reviewed span a period of 4 months, from February, the earliest, through July, the latest, all 2017. The period of the Auditor General's report spans a longer period of time, and by all indications from the reports we have seen from several other persons who have testified, the challenges were specifically taking place during this period, but perhaps longer. Is there any reason why over the course of 4 months we have just these memos? Were there any other occasions during which you wrote during the period covering the report of the Auditor General?
Yes, Senator. I wrote, as you know, on other occasions, but those are what I kept. I wrote I write HR if there was a matter to that was of concern. I also wrote the administration department sometimes. So those are all I kept. So it was just not limited to a 4-month period.
But just for clarity, Chairman, are you saying that you wrote over an extended period of time on the challenges being experienced in terms of operating procedures? And these are just a few of them.
Yes.
Would you be in a position to provide the committee with any of those other items of correspondence raising your concerns, ma'am?
No, I don't have any more, Senator. And I just want to reiterate again, I wrote to enhance the policies and procedures as I saw them because I wanted to improve the governance structure and the efficiency and effectiveness. So I would always write any and every department.
Minister, I'm sorry. Minister Moore, Minister Jordan. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sue, just a very quick question. With regard to the repayment of the monies to the chairman, I just wanted to be clear in my mind. You said that you received an invoice from the chairman for the items?
No. I received a document.
Okay. So the chairman gave you a document, a letter?
Marked
No.
invoice.
From the
Marked
general
invoice.
manager.
Or invoice? But not an invoice, a document.
Yes.
All right, so the general manager sent you a document from the chairman asking for repayment.
A memo.
So it was a memo you received.
Yes.
And so the chairman sent the general manager a memo and he sent it to you for repayment.
No.
In the interest of clarity, Mrs. Sue.
Clarify, please. Mr.
Yes, my impression was that the chairman made a claim, however that was brought to you, which you resisted until you could get further evidence that the payment was merited. The general manager sent you a memo attached to a document labeled invoice from the chairman. Is that correct?
Correct, Chair.
All right.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. Correct.
Okay. So, what's on the memo? What was the memo actually saying?
To Financial Controller Felicia Sue, copied, subject reimbursement of funds to the chairman. The attached receipts represent personal funds used by the chairman for the purchase of various tools and equipment for the quality assurance departments at Weymouth and Mangrove in 2016 and 17. Please review and check the receipts and debit the special account as approved by the Ministry of Finance, memo reference 5058-00B Volume T20 Volume 3, dated September 21st, 2016. The amount is as follows. Items purchased in August and September 2016 and January 2017, $119.45, excuse me. That's the memo to me.
And I heard in your letter that you said there was an attachment of receipts. So you had those as well?
Yes, but I don't have them in my possession. But the receipt, what I had was just the invoice indicating Pierce Furniture, a printer, and such like. This is what I had. So I'm saying subsequently, when I wrote and asked for the documentation, the invoice then from the particular supplier was provided.
So you got the copy of the invoice from the supplier as well as the receipt showing the invoice had been paid?
Yes, ma'am.
So you had both?
I remember an invoice. I don't remember getting receipt, but I remember getting the invoice.
Okay. Now, forgive I need to ask again. So, in your experience, because you're the financial controller, and so you would know a lot about invoices and receipts. So, if I get an invoice from an entity, that shows the cost of the item that I'm trying to procure, correct?
Yeah.
But it doesn't show whether or not I actually got the item or paid for it. Is that correct?
There will be some indication received or something like that.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's the question
Yeah.
I'm asking you. So, but the invoice doesn't show that. Invoice just says, this is what I'm asking you to pay for an item. Is that correct?
I'm saying to you that an invoice could show that, could serve as a receipt in some cases as well.
Okay. Now, in this case, did the invoice serve as a receipt?
I don't recall because I don't have
You don't
it.
recall?
But I remember receipt might have been produced, but the correct documentation was provided. That's as much as I can remember.
So you don't remember getting either an invoice that was an invoice and receipt combined, or an invoice and a receipt? One of the two.
I think they might have been both. But
Both of what?
The invoices came afterwards for the purchase. So I'm saying that the receipt might have been given as well. The documentation was provided because I was satisfied that it was.
So might means yes, or might is in the true sense of the word might? I mean, in other words, you got the receipt first and then you got an invoice, or you got an invoice and a receipt. Is it might, or are you sure?
I'm not sure because I don't recall.
You don't recall, but you think maybe.
I was satisfied that the documentation was provided.
So at the time you were satisfied it was correct?
Yes.
And that's why you would authorize the payment?
Yes.
Okay. Just one last question on that same item. So the two items that were on the invoice that you described, you actually, to your knowledge, those items were actually received by the Transport Board?
Yes, to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of questions. One, going back to the sale of what I have to say is the alleged sale of a bus body. Were you satisfied, Mrs. Sue, that the receipt that was attached to the letter from Mr. Catwell was a legitimate receipt?
Yes, Minister.
Okay. And you had no reason to believe that it could have been anything other than a copy of a legitimate receipt? It's not a trick question. I'm just asking you, but let me put it a different way, just in case you think it's a trick question. When you saw it, were you convinced that this had come from the Transport Board, or were there any flags that went off in your mind to question the authenticity of the receipt that would have been copied from?
I was satisfied that it was an authentic receipt.
Okay. On the matter of, I'm just tying the discussion on the 14,000 refund to the chair to the matter of inventory. Let me ask one question before the other. I think it was asked before, but I'm not sure that I got the answer properly. I think the question that was asked, is it normal for a chair, a transport board chair, to be specific, to make purchases and be refunded for those purchases afterward? Was it something that happened? I don't want to say a frequency, but did it happen periodically that the transport board chair would make purchases and then be refunded for those purchases? We know it happened on the, somewhere around the 15th of March of 2017.
I would respond to that the procurement procedure would generally be followed by all persons. So this was not the normal procurement procedure.
This was not the normal thing. Okay, but did it happen? Let me ask it simply. Did it happen more than once?
In this particular
Yeah,
case?
where the chair made a purchase and then came for a refund, or requested a refund, I should say.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. In your tenure, how many chairs have you worked with?
4.
Was this something that happened with, the question, what I'm trying to get to without making you feel that I'm trying to put you in a corner, I want to know if this is systemic. So the question really is it something that happened across different chairs? Did it happen only to the chair you identified at this juncture, 2017, February?
It only happened on this
It
occasion.
only happened on this occasion. Okay, so it was not, I cannot assume then as a member of this committee that it was systemic. It was not a normal occurrence. The few times, however few there were, or the many times, however many there were that you encountered it, was only during the tenure of this particular chair.
That is correct.
Okay. When items are bought, somebody determines if they are operational to be expensed or to be capitalized. What is the basis on which you do that?
The capitalization policy, we were in the process of determining with the auditors.
Okay.
So the items would normally be expensed in keeping with the budget that we would have submitted to Ministry of Finance through our ministry for approval.
Okay.
So for example, we would have in our budget bus maintenance. So the items would be purchased on
Anything related to that
Yes,
would be
our
expensed?
bus spars, yes, would be
Okay.
expense. It's only then, in time, the auditors then, in fact, it was in a little discussion with them because I felt that things under over $10,000 should be capitalized. Or then they said no, I went to 30, but they contended that these things were expenditure items. So we were, at the time of the audit, we will determine what would be expense or capitalized.
Okay. Now, you had concerns about the stock taking But let me put it a different way. You sent a memo on April the 4th speaking to concern about stock taking. You said it is our belief that these variances, so there were variances, and the variances, I would take it to be what we call adverse variances. You said the variances might have been lower if there was consistent checking of inventory. Kindly advise if your department conducts perpetual stock taking, and if so, how often? And then you make a recommendation after that. I have a couple of questions. One is, the first on this matter, what prompted you, I know generally what did, because there are variances and they're obviously large. What specifically prompted you to speak to this matter?
From my recollection, to ensure that proper procedures and governance were followed at all times. The variance here was really in keeping with the audit. I think the auditors had given us the threshold, and I don't think it was considered adverse from what I recall, but I wanted to continue to improve the management, to see how things were done.
The reason why I asked the question is because, and the reason why I asked you what specifically, because I see in the first paragraph the 2.67% for, this is Mercedes stores, I assume this is, yeah, there's respectively, and 1.94 for Leyland stores, which does not strike me as, you don't want variances at all, but it doesn't strike me as being very large.
Right, they weren't.
And I am wondering if there is something else that caused you to put this into writing.
No, not that I can recall, Minister.
So was it
I would-
repeated?
Yes, I would, after each stock take, I would always report, this is what the variance is, and encourage that procedures be implemented.
Okay. Were the variances always adverse variances?
Yes.
Always adverse variances, okay. And you got to the point where you recommended, well, it caused you concern to the point where you thought you would reduce it to rating and ask for periodic stock taking, which is what this looks like. Well, you don't mention the word periodic. Oh no, you said perpetual.
Yeah.
Be done. So this is probably more accounting theory now. You're suggesting here that there's a perpetual system. Was there a perpetual inventory system?
No, they periodic. We would only do inventory at year end.
Right, okay. And that was physical
Yes.
physical stock?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, but the question in here, not the question, the statement suggests that you weren't sure if outside of the year-end stock, if they were doing other stock during, on an ongoing basis,
Right.
perpetual.
Correct. They weren't. You're right. So this is why I
okay.
was recommending that we do it, as I said, even quarterly. But there were number of line items, there were number of stock items we would appreciate. But my recommendation is not just wait till year end when the auditors were in, but during the year, do some perpetual stock taking.
Now, I'm a little bit confused only because I am trying to, I may understand, but I'm trying to work out perpetual and quarterly, because quarterly sounds periodic. Perpetual sounds as though you can check it at any point in time. So were you asking, was your concern such that you felt that every quarter there needed to be some, because you're only going to work with a variance if there is a comparison. You have to do some kind of comparison. If there's a perpetual system, then you don't know there's a variance until there's something to compare the number that throws up with.
So the actual.
Right. So were you asking for a physical stock take to be done more frequently than annually?
Yes, this is something that I would have recommended, yes.
No, the other question I have is, you're writing to the quality assurance manager and you are saying, I recommend. What is the relationship between finance and quality assurance in a matter that relates to stock taking? Is it that you only recommend? Can you insist that it be done? Because it occurs to me that stock taking is fundamental, especially in a place like a transport board, some place with a fleet of vehicles with a ton of spare parts and other items. It strikes me that stock taking must be fundamental. Well, let me also say that in a situation where you know that things can disappear, right? They can walk. Stock taking then is fundamental to the integrity of the financial statements that your department is going to produce. What is the relationship between finance and quality assurance as it relates to making sure that the information that comes to you is information that you can stand behind?
I would have somebody from the finance department oversee the counting of the items. So but in terms of relationship, that was,
So finance oversaw the stock take
yes.
to work toward the integrity of the stock take. So then when you're recommending that they be done every quarter, is it that you don't have the authority to insist that it be done every quarter?
The authority for advice to the other department head would have had to come from the GM because we were all on the same level. So because our relationship was lateral, I could not instruct another manager to do something.
Did the general manager agree with this approach?
I couldn't say, sir.
Did you?
But as you see, the person was included.
Right, let's say the person was copied. But given that all you could do, or given that you were saying to us that all you could do is to recommend, and you are suggesting that the person who could give the quality assurance manager direction would be the GM, did you speak to the GM, write to the GM, in an effort to make sure that the numbers that were causing you some challenge were numbers that you felt you could rely on? Did you ask the GM for support in getting stock takes done on a quarterly basis?
From what I recall, I could have, because my steps were taken to start the process. But I would say to you, there were numerous line items. I don't remember the stock count. It's not that easy. It's not like counting stock at.
I've done the stock take for LIAC already, so I'm familiar with some of those challenges.
So that's why, but steps were taken subsequently to put it in place.
Put in place? Okay.
Yes.
So you are saying, Mrs. Sue, that in spite of what may appear to be low variances, 1.94%, this situation caused you enough concern to put this into writing, and then later on, I don't remember when, April 12th. So this is April 4th, and then April 13th, you are indicating that you have not gotten a response from the quality assurance manager, and you are now appealing for cooperation. This is 9 days later. In government, this is not really a long time, not normally seen as a long time. That you are raising it again makes me wonder, or makes me think that something is going on in your head that is not on the paper and that you are not saying here, that causes you to see this as an urgent matter. Or let me ask a different question. Is this your normal way of doing things? 9 days after one memo, if you don't get a response, you follow up with another one? Is your normal way of operating?
I wouldn't say normal, but I was always on department heads to improve their operations and their procedures. So in this case, yes, it was a quick follow-up, but it may be that I was waiting on another matter that I thought I would have asked about. So you keep alluding to concern. I just want to reiterate that I would encourage everybody to improve their processes, all departments.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to get from you what was going through your head. All right. I think I rest here.
All right, thank you, Minister Jordan. Ms. Sue, the chairman will have sought to acquire supplies from Pierce and I imagine other people, based on what you've said, without a formal requisition, going through a formal requisition process from the Transport Board?
Yes, sir, and that was corrected.
All right, he did it, but it was corrected.
Yes, after I wrote.
And he was paid for all the claims made by him or on his behalf for money spent out of his personal funds.
That is correct.
He was paid by check, cash.
Some transfers were made directly to his account, I think, on some occasions.
Transfers directly to his account.
Yes.
No checks issued directly to him,
I
as far as
don't
you
recall.
No cash payments made to him or anybody on his
No,
behalf?
we don't do cash, Mr. Chair.
All right. In the instances where checks may have been used and issued in his name, would there have been any instance where any were signed by him?
No, sir.
All right.
No, sir.
All right. Now, please clarify for me, because you said you said something to me, gave me one impression, then you spoke to Minister Moore. In response to Minister Moore's question, I got a different opinion. My understanding was that, especially with reference to the $14,819.45, you resisted reimbursing this because there was no proper documentation. Subsequently, you got a letter from the general manager with a document attached and in the name of the chairman supporting the claim for the reimbursement. I had asked then, was the invoice an invoice issued by the supplier, or was it just a document labeled invoice that came from the chairman himself? To that you said yes. When you addressed me, when you addressed Minister Moore, it seemed as though you were saying, beyond that document labeled invoice from the chairman, you got actual invoices from Pierce's or
Whoever the supplier was, actual invoices came, yes. Mr.
subsequently,
Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
before the payment was made or after?
Before the payment was made,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any further questions, Minister Moore?
Just one very short one, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Mrs. Sue, for payments at the Transport Board, you don't pay cash at all, only checks or direct debits?
That's correct. Cash would be for items less than $500, so
Just
yeah,
like a
Material.
petty cash or something?
correct.
So the persons that are, does it take two people to authorize a payment by check, or just one person can sign the check?
Always two persons, as I indicated earlier.
So the two people would be one person from the management and one person from the board?
The amounts over $5,000 would generally be the GM and the deputy chairman, say in the case of anything over $5,000, or on some occasions the management, the FC or the accountant could sign.
So anything over $5,000, that payment or that check is authorized by a member of management and and either the deputy chairman or the chairman of the board?
It's over 5,000, but there are some instances when a member of the management team would sign with the GM.
So there are instances where two members of the management team can sign without the chairman or the deputy chairman of the board.
Yes.
And is that for any amount of money?
No.
Is there a limit?
As I said, over $5,000.
So over
unless it was an
5,000.
emergency, yes. But
So-
like say, for example, transfers to a person's account. Say a letter had to be written to the respective bank. So the letter would be signed in that case by two members of the management team.
So let me just get it clear. So anything over $5,000, if it's a check, the manager must sign with either the chairman or the deputy chairman.
That's generally the case, but there would have been instances where two management signed. But yes, it's the chairman, the GM and or the chairman, correct? Chairman or deputy.
So you are saying that the process is supposed to be that management and either the chairman or the deputy chairman are to sign a check if it's over $5,000. But that's not always the
Well,
process.
except in the case of payroll, I said, because payroll always signed by the management, there were too much. So those checks over $5,000 are signed by management.
So payroll is one example.
Exception, yes.
Now, in terms of purchasing or procuring items for the transport board, would management be able to sign a check or authorize a payment over $5,000? Okay, you said that you can do it for payroll. Can you do it for procuring items for the transport board?
No, because for those procurement of items to large suppliers, so for example, if you were making a purchase to a large supplier over $5,000, the checks generally are signed by those two persons.
So if I want to buy 2 chairs for the transport board, and the 2 chairs cost $10,000, I would then need management and the board in order to procure the item?
Correct.
Now, in the case that we have been speaking on today, with the item that the chairman was reimbursed for, you indicated that the money was transferred to his account?
On some instances, that was done, but I don't recall for this specific case. I don't recall.
So for this case, the $14,819.45, which is over the $5,000 threshold, you don't recall whether or not he was, do you recall whether it was sent to his account directly or if he was given a check? Because you say you don't pay cash, so I guess the choices are either it was put to his account directly or he was paid by check. Do you recall how he received the $14,819.45?
I don't recall.
You don't recall? Not at all?
No.
And do you recall whether or not it was authorized by management and the board, as is the protocol of the transport board, or you don't recall that either?
I don't recall.
Okay,
Miss
so-
Sue, pardon me. You need to be very careful what you say. These hearings are very serious matters. We would have advised you right up front that there are legal implications if your testimony before the committee is otherwise than that which is truthful. And I'm not implying anything. I'm just cautioning you, because I'm sure not too long ago you said to me that the payment to the chairman was made by a direct debit to his account. You're saying to Minister Moore now that you don't recall. If you don't recall, say you don't recall. Do not go out there and say it was made directly to his account, and then come back thereafter and suggest that you don't recall.
I thank you for that caution, and the correction is I don't recall.
Okay, so the chairman was reimbursed the money, but you are not sure how that reimbursement was done. Is that correct now?
That is correct. I don't recall.
So the previous comment earlier was not correct.
There are some instances I was clarifying that it might have been direct or it would have been checked. I don't recall.
Okay, I'm not speaking hypothetically, because I'm speaking about a specific instance, which is this instance. So all the other instances that may have occurred during your 15-year tenure, I'm only speaking about this particular $14,000 and odd dollars that we're here discussing today. And so you're saying you don't recall whether he was paid by check or whether he was paid as a direct debit to his account. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You don't recall?
I don't recall.
And so, and I'll ask again, you said earlier that for transactions where you procure items to the transport board over $5,000, that it needs the authorization of a member of management as well as someone from the board. Now, in this instance, can you say whether or not that was obtained?
I don't remember, Minister.
You don't remember?
No.
But that is what would normally occur or should occur.
That is the procedure.
And my last question, and this is really my last question on this matter, but would you be in a position to be able to find out that information to indicate the two items I just asked about? One, whether or not it had the correct authorization in terms of having the authorization of someone from the board and someone from management, and two, whether or not he was paid by check or if it's a direct debit.
I am not in a position to.
Not in a position to.
No.
And so the process for the authorization of monies over $5,000, are those in writing?
There is a procedure, yes.
So there's actual documentation?
Yes.
So you have some sort of requisition or
The
something?
procedure speaks to,
It's in writing?
yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mrs. Sue.
You're welcome.
Senator Nurse.
Just some quick questions. In the Auditor General Special Report, under section 2.11, dealing with cost savings not utilized, the Auditor General discusses the fact that substantial savings were being lost because the board was relying on a local supplier for transmissions. After having at some point been using or purchasing some transmissions from an overseas supplier, And the response from the personnel, the transport board personnel, was that because of the tight cash flow situation and the overseas supplier partly required cash payments. I'm just wondering so you had credit, so was there a credit arrangement with the local supplier?
No formal credit arrangements, no. We just purchase items and were expected to pay within 30 to 60 days.
So how did you pay? How did you pay the local supplier then? And you see, what I'm trying to understand is, was there a significant difference between the arrangement, the financial arrangements for the local supplier that would have convinced you that you should stick with the local supplier of the transmissions?
The fact that they allow us to build up a large amount of credit.
Okay, so how were you paying them then? Every
When we get
other
money,
week, every
because
2 weeks, every month? How did you pay?
Sometimes months and then they weren't paid because there were no funds available. So we accrued a lot of credit.
Uh-huh. Who would have made the decision to go with the local supplier? Was that at management level? Was that a board decision? Was that who would have made that decision?
Decision to go to a particular supplier.
To go to the local supplier rather than continue purchasing from the overseas supplier.
It was due to the cash flow. As I'm saying, the local supplier would perform work and then wait for payment to be done when the board got funds.
Yeah, I understand that. So was the board aware of the substantial difference that could have been gained by purchasing transmissions from the overseas supplier?
Yes.
Okay. And was any directive given that this local supplier should be used rather than the overseas supplier? That you?
The decision to use the supplier would be dependent on whether the person could perform the service. So in my last testimony, I indicated that buses would be sent to certain service providers who could perform the work.
Mm-hmm. You see, at the end of the day, you were still paying the local supplier. I don't think he would have gone without any money for any substantially long period of time.
For a long time. We mount up huge amount of credit with them.
Okay. So you weren't paying him at all then? You weren't paying him?
Most suppliers, because of the lack of funds,
Okay.
a certain amount of subsidy, as you know, was voted for the board. So when that money was expended, we accrue a large amount of debt. So we owed suppliers a substantial amount of money.
Okay. And just one other question, just to revisit, and I believe you may have been asked on it before. This is in relation to the invoices which were in some cases paid twice. I'm just trying to refresh my recollection. But the same individuals have been signing, the same individuals making these payments have been signing the checks, or were there a number of persons who signed off on the checks?
Different persons signed off on the checks. So it would have been GM and the chairman.
The GM and the
chairman,
chair
yes.
together, they would sign together?
Yes, so following the procedure.
So there are two signatories required,
All the
first of
time.
all, right? Okay.
Yes.
Anyone else signing? Anyone else was
No,
signing?
only those who were authorized to sign.
Okay. So it's just the GM and the chairman signing
Right.
the
As,
checks? Because I'm just trying to, some of us would have gone through this process already, where you've signed checks, and particularly for, fairly big numbers, you tend to remember, I signed that amount, I signed a check for that amount or a similar amount, maybe last week or maybe last month or something like that, and you would probably query it. So I'm just trying to find out if there were no queries, there were never any queries coming back from the GM or the chairman about any particular invoice that they may have signed, that they figure they may have signed off on already?
There would not have been any queries, one, because there were long spaces, a long timeline between when a check would be written to a particular supplier. So it wasn't that there were checks were written this week and next week. But because of the cash flow, as I just explained, the supplier might have been paid the beginning of July and then wouldn't receive money again till the beginning of August. There would be instances like that. And secondly, why no questions would have been asked is because a number of checks were written, a check was written for a number of invoices. So you would not have picked up 100,000 this week and 100,000 next week because the check consisted sometimes of 2 or 3 or 4 invoices together.
Okay. Okay, so, okay. Right.
Minister Husbands.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to the conversation you had with Senator Moore, because I'm just trying to understand the process by which a chairman would pay from out of his pocket for items for a firm of the magnitude of $40,000. So if you could recount for me, if you can recall, when the general manager came to you, she would have presented you with the memo, or she sent you a memo saying, please reimburse the chairman, so. Would it have come to you, or she brought it to you?
It would have been delivered to me.
Would have been delivered. Okay. And then you did what? You wrote back to her? Or you telephoned her? You discussed it?
I wrote to her.
You wrote to her?
Yes.
Okay. And there was no discussion between the two of you as to what would have led to a situation where the chairman would have paid $40,000 for equipment for the transport board.
I don't recall having a discussion. We may have, but I don't remember.
So you're not aware of the set of circumstances that would have led the chairman to so do? You don't know if something broke down unexpectedly, is urgently needed, they checked with you, there was no money to replace this particular item, and the chairman puts his hand up and said, look, I will advance the money. You don't know what are the circumstances that would have led to the chairman, and
No,
you did not
sir.
ask?
I don't recall asking because I received the instruction.
Okay. So when the invoice came to you, would it have been necessary for there to be a copy of the board decision that authorized the payment, that authorized this unusual transaction. They would not have given you any verification for assenting to this particular transaction.
Verification was given in the memo, Minister, which I read, because the Ministry of Finance had advanced monies for a special project. So the memo from the GM referred to that. So that was the authority.
Okay, sorry, I didn't catch that memo. Where, is it one of these or you have it there?
No, this is one that I referred to and I read to the committee, which was included in the correspondence from the GM to me.
Or if you don't mind, I didn't quite catch it. If you could just go over it as to what would have led to the chairman taking so unprecedented a step.
I don't know, as I said, what would have been led for him taking the step, but the memo said the attached receipts were used. Please review the receipts and debit the special account. And this was a special account which we had received monies from the Ministry of Finance for the special project. And so the monies were coming from that account.
Oh, and the payment that he made was for something that was within that special project then, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And if you had the money in that special project account, why was that not used instead of the chairman's money?
I don't know, Minister, because it was done. I don't know what extenuating circumstances, if maybe it was a bargain. I don't know.
You don't know if it was...
I don't know the reason for the action by the chairman. As I said, I don't know.
And you would not have inquired or heard via the grapevine or
No, ma'am.
anything as to what were the circumstances that would have led to him doing something like that when the money was available in the special projects account? Because obviously there was money there.
No, I wouldn't have been aware of the reasons.
All right, thank you. Chair?
Thank you. Ms. Sue, I want to thank you for your patience with us, sincerely. And this being your second time visit here to give voice before these hearings. And Mr. Sue, thank you for your quiet patience in the role you played here as well. We will allow you to take leave of us. Sorry, yes, Minister. Yeah, we have one more question. If you will indulge us for just one more question.
Yeah, and it has to do, I am not going back to where it was before, but the matter, I raised the matter earlier of the financial information, and I'd asked about the role of the general manager in getting these things put in order, what you call good practice. The Auditor General's report speaks in a couple of places to information and reliable information. My question to you, did the board, well, let me back up, did the general manager, did the chair, did the board use the financial information your department provided to make decisions?
Yes, I would say that.
Okay. No, I'm asking, I know that your information, the information from the finance department is intended to be
Informed decisions, yeah.
to inform decisions. But based on what I'm seeing in the Auditor General's report and hearing from you as it relates to the general manager not really being on board with insisting that there is good accounting practice.
Yeah, not my words.
No, I told you this is what I'm getting from you. So I'm having to distill because you are not,
No,
you have not.
Okay, that's not what I said. No, Minister, that general manager was not on board.
But in that case, and let me go back to ask the question. Did the general manager support any of your requests for recommendations, which is the question I asked in the earlier round? did the general manager at the time engage with you, assist you, help to get the other persons who were your peers to follow good accounting practice?
I would say yes overall.
In what way or ways?
Well, by encouraging them to follow the practice. When I wrote, she would have seen it, and I guess, would have said to them that
So what does guess mean in the context of your response?
that they would support. Yes.
I don't understand then the use of the word guess. You said, I'm getting from you that you are not sure. You're making an assumption because you're saying you guess. There's nothing in writing. Did she say to you, I spoke to Mr. whoever the insurance manager was at the time? I forget the name. But did she say, I spoke to him or her, I wrote to him or her?
I don't recall, but I would say overall there was support. That's
Okay.
my
All right. I'm not sure how to process that because I feel as though you're assuming support. And that's the reason why I made the comment that I made that you disagreed with. Because I've not heard anything from you that suggests that your GM was on board with you. I am hearing from you that you believe so or that you guess so.
I'm not sure what you were looking for. Do you think that she should have come and say with a big hammer, well, you're supposed to do this? She saw the
Well, I know
recommendations, so...
There's a lot of room between a memo and a big hammer. I am not strong enough to hold a big hammer. My question to you, because I was going on to ask about the use of financial information in decision making, and I wanted to find out, because a special audit is when things ain't going so good. That's the only reason for a special audit. Decisions that are made by an organization should be based on information, good information.
Correct.
I questioned you earlier on inventory because my experience tells me that stuff walks, things disappear. The reason why I asked you the question was because the percentages that I saw, my own training tells me that these are not significant percentages, so that there must have been something else motivating you. If I could have gotten 1.94 in all of my stock counts in my own professional life, I would be very happy. But it's because I was getting more. So I was asking you about the integrity of the financial information. You said to me that you copied the general manager, but you did not go on the limb to say the general manager spoke to quality assurance or told you that she spoke to quality assurance. You said nothing of the sort. So that's the reason why I'm coming back to that before, to see if even if it makes sense asking you further about this, because the question about this information and this questioning that I'm doing now is based on an assumption that you're suggesting to me is not correct. But I'm not hearing that it is not correct. All right, let me go on to the question that I really want to ask, because I realize, Chair, that I'm going over the time that you intended. My question has to do with whether or not the management and the board use the information that your department provided to make decisions. I want to know if, in your mind, they were serious about using that information to make decisions. Because based on what the Auditor General's report is saying, there are significant gaps that would make this information of limited value, not of no value, but let me say of reduced value. And based on the issues with inventory, I just wanted to know if in the system, if there was a view that what you provided was just, okay, that's just ticking a box. You need to have financials every month, so they're done, that's fine. But I want to know whether or not they were used to make decisions. If those financials were taken seriously.
I would say that efforts would have been made, Minister.
Efforts made by who?
The management and the board to improve any operations. So to answer your question, yes, they would have given support.
No,
That's my feeling.
My second question about support. I wanted to know, support was my first question, but we are not clear on that, so I've moved back to the one that I want to ask in this round. It is not about support. My question has to do with how seriously management and board took the information that you provided in the form of financial statements.
They took it as seriously as they could, given the constraints that we only were allocated a specific amount of money, and there was always cash flow issues. So as best they could, this is how decisions were made. As I said, we got a subsidy, and that was the subsidy, so the system, the bus company still had to run, so we still had to get repairs done for the buses. So the creditors allow us to do that. So they were aware that we would have had this large amount of credit, for example. So they would have been aware, but there was more or less nothing that they could do.
So are you suggesting that because of financial constraints, cash flow constraints, that decisions were made without major reference to the financials?
That's not what I'm suggesting, sir. I said that they would always make reference to the financials, but they worked within their limitations.
So what limited the usefulness of the financial statements? You said, you used the word limitations a number of times. But what limited their usefulness?
The cash flow, the absence of cash.
But that's never a limitation in relation to financial statements. The financial statements tell you that there are limitations in cash. You see that from the cash flow statement or statement of flow of funds. But the financial statements themselves are not limited. They tell you exactly what you are speaking to. So I'm not understanding when you say the board, there were limitations, so the board used them, or the management used them only as far as they could. My words. They saw the financials as being limited in their usefulness. Is that what I'm hearing? Because of the cash flow, because of the lack of cash, not cash flow, but lack of cash?
I wouldn't say they saw the financial statements as limited in their usefulness. They were guided by them, but their response to decision making was limited because of the lack of funds.
But in that case, then, I want to suggest to you that what you've said suggests that decisions were made without full reference to financials. You said they took them into consideration, but they had to make decisions to keep the buses on the road, etc. So they went ahead and did that, understanding, well, we have financials, but they're of limited use because we don't have any money in here.
They would know that we owe the creditors money, but we have to get the supplies. So as long as the creditors supply us with credit, that was taken into consideration. So they were aware of the credit.
Okay. Well, I think you've reinforced what I thought you were saying, which is that management did not use the financials for decision making. In other words, they took them, they noted them, but not use them for decision making. So for example, if you're talking about expenses, whether or not you have money, you record your expenses. And that information is used to guide decisions,
Yes,
whether or not you have money, because you record everything in the financials.
yes.
But if they are being used in the way that you are suggesting they were, then it means that they weren't fully a part of the decision-making process.
But as a social entity, Minister, you cannot, I'm getting the impression that you are trying to see the Transport Board like a profit-making entity. So it was a social...
No, but let me correct that. I am seeing the Transport Board as an entity that needs to be guided by good information. So that's been the gist of all my questions for the whole afternoon. An entity that needs to be guided by good information. So whether it's a social enterprise, a school, a transport board, or a fellow who owns 5 ZRs, it doesn't really matter. You need to make decisions, and good decisions are always driven by good information. So that, as a matter of fact, I would want to posit to you that the worse the financial situation, the more reliant the decision making needs to be on good information. But when things are going real good, sometimes you don't check to see how money gets spent. It's when things get real rough that you checking every penny and every cent. And that's really what we want to get from you in terms of not whether or not transport is supposed to be profit making. I have views on that, but that's not the subject of my questioning as it relates to the special audit. I just wanted to know, Chair, about whether or not the information, if management was using the information that was provided by Mrs. Sue's department.
Thank you, Minister Jordan. Mr. Trotman, any comment? Query?
Chair, just one minor issue, really. In terms of a response, we would have gotten a response from the Transport Board to the special audit. And there was just one paragraph that I wouldn't mind hearing Mrs. Sue's comment on. It has to do with the whole issue of fleet insurance of the buses. It says the board had renegotiated this insurance premium contract, saving approximately...
Could you raise your volume just a little bit for us?
Sure.
Thanks.
Right. It says in this response that the board renegotiated its insurance premium contract, saving approximately $1 million. And just help me there to have a better understanding of that. The fact that you can save $1 million in terms of renegotiating the insurance premium. So was it like the insurance premium without the contract? Was it to tender? Help us to understand how the board was able to save $1 million.
I'm trying to remember the circumstances surrounding that because I don't remember, but I think it was, we read it down to a specific number of buses as opposed to the previous insurance cost was given for fleet amount. So the insurance was given, say, for a set amount, 250 buses. But the reduction then was done with that we reduced the fleet number from, say, 250 to 100 because the bus availability was low at the time. That's my recollection.
Follow-up question, Chair. So was it possible then that over time you were insuring more buses than you actually had?
The bus availability was up at the time, so the insurance would have been in keeping with the buses that were on the road, or were expected to be on the road, because it was over 100 at some point in time. Over 200, sorry.
I would wish, Mr. Trotman, you would revisit that question when I think we're having the general manager come here, are we? Yeah? Yeah? Please. Thank you very much, Ms. Sue, Mr. Sue, for giving us your time.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Trust it has not been too strenuous. We wish you a good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Colleagues, we have the corporate secretary for the board who would have been required to present herself with volumes of the minutes of the meetings of the board, I would want to propose simply that we have her come in and lodge those minutes with us. We get copies individually. You'll be able to reflect on them until the next time we meet. We'll have her actually come back and respond to some of those issues in those minutes, captured in those minutes, or perhaps some of those questions emanating from those minutes will be put to the general manager. That would be my proposal. We don't detain, what's her name, Miss Catlin? Catwell. Miss Catwell? No relation to Mr. Catwell, is it? 5 o'clock is our scheduled cutoff time, so we're not going to keep her longer. Neither will we detain you beyond a few minutes more. Ms. Catwell, good evening to you.
Good afternoon.
We're in the presence of some of the members of the Public Accounts Committee. We have the Auditor General, a member of his staff. We have members of the parliamentary staff here and media. There's a public hearing. Our scheduled cutoff time is around 5. We don't propose to detain you beyond that, and we're coming up upon that hour now. My understanding is that you have come here with the purpose of presenting some of the minutes of the meetings of the board.
Yes, sir.
Of the board, not the management.
No.
Of the board. Okay. Now, we're not going to have you speak to us this afternoon beyond these few matters which I will address to your attention. From the minutes of the board, the committee would want to see what was the board's opinion, what were the discussions around a number of issues as raised in the Auditor General's report. And these have to do with, you should note them because when you come back, we will have to speak to you about them. Double invoicing, once that came to the board's attention, over invoicing, repeated and frequent repairs, sometimes of the same bus units. We have a particular interest in a bus registration BM 506, which is still a mystery to us. And the consultant hired out of Trinidad here for some time made reference to 7 other buses unaccounted for. Don't know if that came to the attention of the board, but if it did, the minutes should reflect it, and we want you to comment on that. Cost of transmissions purchased as opposed to those which could have been available at lesser costs. Procedures in the Q&A department and other issues relative to payments. In some instances, reimbursements, etc. These are the broad things that we will want you to take careful note of in the documented minutes that you have. Right now, we want to ask that you make the minutes available to the committee here, so we can copy and have them disseminated among the members of the committee so they'll be able to preview them before we come next time to the meeting. We'll have yourself here and most likely the general manager at the time to be here. All right?
Yes, sir.
When you do come back, you will be put under oath as to what we will advise you of the implications of that. You may be accompanied, as you are today, by an assistant or a legal counsel.
Yeah, my consultant.
A consultant. Sorry? Do you want to introduce yourself and your consultant?
Yeah, my name is Dolores Catwell. Have been working at the board for 40 years since 1978, December 1978.
Wow.
And I retired last year, June 25th last year.
Wow. You're not related to Mr. BN 506 Catwell?
My brother-in-law.
Oh dear. Glad to make your acquaintance. And you're accompanied by
Joyanne Topping.
Joyanne Toppin. All right, so we're sorry for the delay this afternoon, the inconvenience I'm sure it caused, but members had some extensive questioning for Ms. Sue, and she also took some time in terms of giving her responses. So that occasioned delay, and we don't want to keep you or others beyond the 5 o'clock hour.
Okay.
I want to appreciate your coming and your interest in these matters, and we will let you know in short order when's the next date.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
We need to get those minutes. You and Ms. Hamblin here, the committee, work out how we can get copies of those minutes so we can have them circulated.
Okay. And this one 2013 to 2018 or 2013 and
But
2018?
the period under review in the General's report is 2015, 2018. 2015, 2018.
Okay. Yeah, I have them here with me.
All right. So you make arrangements with Ms.
Okay.
how we can get those copies.
No, okay. I thank you very much.
Thank you. And just to apprise you, further colleagues, I've had some discussions with the Auditor General, Mr. Trotman, and I want to propose as we go forward as a committee to make perhaps more efficient use of our time, not suggesting that you do not make the input that you feel needs to be made. What I'm talking about is there are a lot of matters which would concern the public of Barbados and should concern this committee at this time. And the Parliament of Barbados at this time, we want to treat as quickly as we can to as many of these critically important matters that would fall subject to public query or parliamentary query. Specifically, I'm proposing that we see if we can conclude our examination of the matters relative to the Transport Board in no more than 2 further sessions. I think if we have the General Manager here next time, if we need to call back, I think, Mr. Codrington, Mr. Sylvan Codrington, who is the Quality Assurance Manager, and it's around this department that many of the queries emanate. We have to have him back. We have to have the General Manager here, former. No, this is internal. That's all right. When you cut it, it's all right. We have to have her back. We have to have him back, Mr. Codrington. We have to have the former General Manager to come in. Of course, Ms. Catwell will come back with the minutes. And if we, in the next 2 sessions, could complete the actual interaction with those who come to give evidence, then we can move towards compiling a report that we can present to the Parliament of Barbados. While that report is being compiled, I suggest we don't sit in idleness, but we can begin to look at matters relative to the recent Auditor General's report, and especially with reference to the Barbados Water Authority. Now, that is a report which is fairly wide and extensive in its scope and in its concerns. But I would propose an approach where we look at this in not in a piecemeal fashion. I'm not suggesting that, but that we take certain sections of it and deal with a section at a time rather than try to deal with the whole report, because it really covers a wide scope of concerns. And specifically, I think once we get started,